A very good morning to you. Welcome. I hope you did manage to read Romans 9 to 11, the 3 chapters which are all about the Jewish situation. If you didn't get a chance to read them, it might be worth turning this off and reading the 3 chapters and then coming back, because there's a huge discussion going on in these 3 chapters by Paul. And when you think about his other writings, he has declared quite clearly and quite freely in his other writings that he was a Jew of the Jews, he was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. He was a Jew through and through, and he was as against the changes that Jesus brought as any Jew could ever be. To begin with, he fought it with everything in himself, and he was like those people that Jesus spoke about when he stood looking down at Jerusalem, knowing what was coming, and cried out in great anguish, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often would I have gathered you under my wings as a hen gathers her chicks, and you would not." How many parables Jesus told, which illustrated the pain in God's heart when he sees the people that he's chosen, the people who've looked after his vineyard, who reject not only his prophets, but his son as well. Those people who refuse to come to the wedding feast. They're all illustrations of the Jews that would reject Jesus. And it's foretold in the Old Testament. Paul refers to several different arguments in these 3 chapters, taken directly from the Old Testament, showing quite clearly that it was foretold that many Jews would reject the truth. And his heart is breaking like the Lord's heart broke over Jerusalem. His heart is breaking. He says it in such an extreme way. He says, "I would wish myself to be cut off from Jesus, if that would mean they would be saved. That's how much I long for it." And we know from his life recounted in Acts that every single town and village that he went first to the Jewish group, wherever it was meeting, whether it was by the riverside or in the synagogue. He went to the Jews first and proclaimed Christ to them, because they are God's people. The Jewish people are God's people. And of course he wants them to know about the Messiah who has come. And he makes many discussions in these 3 chapters, and we'll look at a few of them. But we must remember the argument that he's made in the beginning of this book, which is that the Jew needs to be saved by grace, by faith in Jesus, just as much as the Gentile does. Because the Jew cannot attain righteousness through obedience of the law, and the Gentile is outside the covenant and lost without that. Both groups must come by faith to Jesus. There's no distinction between the Jew or the Greek. And yet Paul comes to this chapter and says, "My heart yearns for the Jews." And you see that in his life. How many times he was rejected by the Jews. They would not listen, and he understood them in a way we can never really understand him, understand them, because he was one of them. He knew with intense personal knowledge what it was like to hate the things that he was being challenged with. He knew what it was like to not want his life to change, to not want the things he learned about Jesus to be true. He didn't want it. But he, in his own pursuit of Jesus, had come to an understanding that all the benefits of the Jew did not give them salvation. Salvation came through faith in Jesus, came by grace. It was a free gift. It could not be earned. It could not be earned by the Jew any more than it could be earned by the Gentile or the non-Jew. It couldn't be earned. And his first way of describing this in chapter 9 is about the children of Abraham. And do you remember when Jesus was alive in John's Gospel, it taught the Jewish leaders came to him and said, "We are Abraham's children." In other words, we're God's people because we're directly descended from Abraham. We're Abraham's children. And so by birthright, we are God's people. We are in. And Jesus said, "No, you're not. You're children of your father, the devil." What a terrible thing to say to these Jewish leaders. But it's true. The illustration here from Paul in verses 6 and 7 and 8. Not all the Israelites truly belong to Israel. Not everyone who physically descends from Abraham belongs to God's people, Israel. Not all of Abraham's children are his true descendants. And he says, it's through Isaac the descendants will be named. What about Esau? Esau was out. The descendants of Esau are not counted amongst God's people, yet they were children of Abraham. It's the children, it was the children of promise. The children of promise. It's quite amazing, isn't it? Ishmael, the children of Ishmael are not counted amongst God's people. And it is the people of faith. And right through the Old Testament, Paul goes on to argue that right through the Old Testament there's warnings that obedience and sacrifice are not what God is asking for. God is asking for a heart relationship with people, for faith, for obedience, for choosing to follow, not for obeying the law. The law, as Paul's argued, was given to show people that it was impossible to get right with God by obeying the law. It was to show how much they needed God's mercy. And some people understood that, but not everybody did. And certainly not everybody in Paul's time. And how Paul longed for his own people. How Paul longed for his own people. There are some people today who have such a high regard for the descendants of Abraham, the Jewish people, that they will do anything to help them fulfill the prophecies as they perceive them from the Old Testament, to get them back to Israel, to help them be established in Israel. But many of them don't even tell them that the Messiah has come. It's so important that the Jew and the Gentile understand that the only way for salvation is Jesus. And Paul is at great lengths to say this, that this understanding he's come to is a mystery. And there are some things in these 3 chapters that are really difficult to accept. That how can it be that God arbitrarily chooses one son over another? And how can he then blame the other son for not doing the right thing? This argument is here in chapter 9. And Paul says, you can't question God. This is just the way it is. And that's true. We'll think about that tomorrow. But this first thought is about the longing in Paul's heart for his own people to come to faith, and how much rejection he experienced it time after time, town after town, city after city, from the Jewish people themselves, and how God's heart breaks that the Jewish people, his own chosen people, have in the main not received the Messiah. So take time today, if you can, to read the 3 chapters again in a different version of the Bible. Try not to use a paraphrase if you can. Use a translation. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.